Okay, I am back. We're going to continue with Jackie. Oh, now, before I forget this, I was talking in the comments the other day to a dear subscriber, and I had mentioned before that I had been in the Merry Wives of Windsor, and we did it with Jersey accents. So I had told them in the comments that I will do the warm-up that we used to do before the show started. So one of the cast would say a line and then we would repeat it, and we would do this several times and we would sing songs like vocal warm-ups. We would do it in the Jersey accent. Anyway, so it goes like this. And now I am going to say the F word, so just prepare thine ears. So I says to my daughter, feed the dog and make me a cup of coffee. And what does she do? She gives the coffee to the dog. So now I got a dead dog, a dumb daughter, and no fucking coffee. That was my favorite thing. So he would say, so I says to my daughter, and then so I said to my daughter, all right, let's do it. All right. So I says to my daughter, feed the dog and get me a cup of coffee. And what does she do? She gives the coffee to the dog. So now I got a dead dog, a dumb daughter, and no fucking coffee. Congratulations. You're ready for Merry Wives of Windsor. Okay, I got to put my phone on silent because if I am reading this off of my phone and it starts to ring, it'll be a jump scare that I don't need. All right, I hope that you can remember where we were. We just finished the first chapter, and it was just like talking about the wedding and how Joe Kennedy just really took the whole thing over, and then her mother kind of set up her father to make sure that he couldn't, walk her down the aisle, and then her stepfather had to, walk her down. We heard that Blackjack Bouvier allegedly had an affair with Cole Porter. Fascinating stuff. All right. I did put a bookmark in, but it seems that it maybe didn't save it. But that's okay, because it was just at chapter 2, so it's an easy find. All right. Here we go. I really don't want to go into my relationship with John F., says the pretty silver-haired woman as she sips her wine. After all, he's dead now, and what can I have to say? Oh, and what I have to say will serve no good purpose, but I can tell you, and I'm very proud of this fact, that I bullied him unmercifully into marrying Jackie. You see, he was having an affair with her at the same time he was having an affair with me. With that little I don't know what that word is. Bon mot? Noelle curls her long, thin legs up under the chair like a kitten. Even at 54, she still retains some of the prettiness. Oh my gosh, even at 54, God forbid, 54 and she still is pretty? La gasp. Timothy, did you hear that? Mm-hmm. Okay, she still retains some of the prettiness that first attracted Kennedy to her years ago. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine a 54-year-old woman retaining any pretty... Sorry, that just struck me so funny. I mean, this book came out in 78, so, The bedroom walls of her apartment are covered with photographs. I'm sorry, I gotta go check on him because maybe he's stuck. 1 second. All right, he's fine. We'll just live with it. Okay, so her bedroom walls are covered. The bedroom walls of her apartment are covered with the photographs of herself as a young woman, looking like a stunning version of Vivian Leigh in Gone with the Wind. What? Looking like a stunning version of Vivian Lee. Vivian Lee is a stunning version of Vivian Lee. What does this mean? Okay. Thick, dark curls fall down her shoulders, displaying a perfectly chiseled face of exquisite features with wide eyes, full sensual mouth, and high cheekbones. She was unquestionably a beauty. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. We've got to look up this gal because I want to know what she is speaking. Noelle. Was she an actress? What? Noelle. I can't find anything. Is that... Well... Noelle. I don't know who it is. If anyone knows who this is, please tell me. Okay. I aged terribly when I hit 40, she says, almost apologetically. That was when Philip died, and he was the love of my life for 14 years. My hair turned in a period of 3 days. She takes another sip of wine and lights a cigarette. Noelle, who lives in Washington and works nights in a law firm, explains that Philip Graham, then publisher of the Washington Post, was the number one love of her life, and John F. Kennedy was her number one playmate. Philip killed himself in August of 1963, and John F. was shot 3 months later, and I couldn't come back to this town for many years because they were both gone. Washington was filled with too many ghosts for me. Now, well, she shrugs. Enough time has passed so that the memories are not quite so painful. A huge picture of Philip Graham still hangs on her bedroom wall, and in the kitchen there is a small snapshot of John F. Kennedy on a bulletin board next to a reminder to feed her cat tender victuals. Tender victuals? Oh, I thought that was the cat's name. That's cat food. I'm like, tender victuals? That's a funny name for a cat. So if any of you have a new cat and you're looking for a name, Tender Victuals. To feed her cat tender victuals. Oh my gosh. And the phone numbers of her hairdresser and the local liquor store. He was such a delight, she says, recalling her affair with Kennedy. I got on so well with him, not because he was so great in bed, although he wasn't bad, but because he had such a great sense of fun. He loved sex, but he was not an affectionate man, and didn't enjoy hugging and kissing at all. But oh, such fun. What? Okay. I remember one day after we made love and he went to sleep, he had taken off his back brace, and I just happened to have some pink lace laying around. So while he was sleeping, I grabbed his girdle and sewed lace all over it. You should have seen his face when he woke up and went to put it on. He didn't laugh out loud, but his eyes danced. He put that back brace on, completely ignoring the fact that it looked like some harlot's corset, and never said a word. He had such good humor. Once during the day he was sleeping with Jackie and me at the same during the days when he was sleeping with Jackie and me at the same time, I gave him a red mustache for Christmas so he could disguise his comings and goings and not be recognized. What else can you give a man who has everything money can buy? With a little more wine, Noelle explains how she bullied Jack Kennedy into marrying Jackie. We were in Europe together, and after we made love in Italy, I told him I was going to send him home to propose to a girl he should marry. I told him Jackie was young and pretty and social and, by a wonderful coincidence, Catholic, which would be ideal for him. He had to marry someone like that if he was going to be president, and we both knew he was going to be president one day. At that time, in 1952, Jackie, who was living with her mother and stepfather, began pursuing Jack Kennedy in the most ingenious ways she could devise, always being available for his last-minute calls for movies and dinner. She once spent hours translating and summarizing a dozen French books about Indochina for him, laboring late at night to finish the task in the cramped little rafter room she shared with her sister at Marywood. He has got to ask me to marry him after all I've done for him, she told a friend. Well, I mean, I guess it worked out this time, but let me tell you, usually when you do too much for a man, it does the exact opposite. um, she bought books for him all the time, brought lunches to his Senate office, and used her newspaper column to catch his attention with such whimsical questions as, "What do you think of marriage? What's your idea of a perfect mate? Do you consider a wife a luxury or a necessity? Can you give any reason why a contented bachelor should get married?" And then there were the questions Kennedy was sure to appreciate, incorporating quotes from his favorite writers. Noel Coward once said, "Some women should be struck regularly like gongs. Do you agree?" Winston Churchill once said, "For a happier marriage, each spouse should breakfast alone. Do you agree?" The Irish author Sean O'Fallon claims the Irish are deficient in the art of love. Do you agree? Years later, there would be many women who could answer that question about Kennedy because, like the fanciful Noel, they knew him intimately before and after he met Jacqueline Lee Bouvier. Coping with the fact that of these women would become one of Jackie's biggest adjustments because she was marrying a man, much like his own father, who was unable to devote himself exclusively to one woman. Sadly enough, in a way, she was prepared for this. Never having been the favorite of her mother and being separated from her father, Jackie grew up lonely, feeling like an outsider in the snobbish Auchincloss family, and always having to take a back seat to her younger sister, a sparkling child of rare beauty. "Lee was always the pretty one," sighed Jackie years later. "I guess I was supposed to be the smart one." The disintegration of her parents' marriage was so devastating to her that shortly after the divorce, her Bouvier relatives began to notice her tendency to withdraw into a private world of her own, becoming distant and aloof, which was her childlike camouflage for the humiliation and shame she felt. Throughout it all, though, she adored her father, the most enchanting figure in her young life. Despite the hateful comments of her mother, who condemned Jack Bouvier's extravagant lifestyle, ranted about his cheap affairs with other women, and ridiculed his good looks and elegant manners, Jackie continued to love those very things about her father. The picture of him she painted for friends was of a dashing buccaneer, absolutely irresistible to women. One photograph in the family album thoroughly delighted her, and she took great glee in displaying it to her friends. It shows her parents standing with a gorgeous woman named Virginia Carnachan, I don't know. Janet, dressed in riding clothes, is perched on a fence, while Blackjack, resplendent in a European-cut suit, complete with an elegant pocket handkerchief, stands next to the exquisite Miss Carnachan, with his hand cupped over hers, holding it to her breast. John Husted remembers the picture well. Jackie showed me that one of her dad holding hands with another woman in full view of her mother, and absolutely roared her head off with laughter. She loved it. Another friend recalls Jackie telling her about her father's affair with another woman on his honeymoon. Jackie told me that within 48 hours after Jack walked down the aisle to marry Janet, they were aboard a ship on their honeymoon, and he spotted a gorgeous creature, pursued and conquered her within minutes, and continued the affair for the duration of the cruise. Janet found out about it, was absolutely devastated, and years later told Jackie in an obvious effort to discredit her philandering father. But Jackie loved the story and told it to all her friends. That is dysfunctional. Oh, my goodness. Years later, according to the same friend, when more than 200 spicy letters by her paternal grandfather to his mistress in the 40s were discovered and put up for sale, Jackie merely smiled as if enchanted. The letters from the late John Verneau Bouvier Jr., a retired New York attorney who was then in his 70s, were adorned with naughty limericks, original love poems, and amusing speculations on the nature of love, sex, marriage, and female attire. In the letters was mention of the fragrant Jacqueline, who, at 18, in Mr. Bouvier's estimation, was one of the most charming and beautiful young girls, quite aside from her alert intelligence, that I have ever encountered. Along with her grandfather, Jackie romanticized her father as a man who would eventually return from his philanderings to hearth and home, where he was always forgiven because he never neglected his children, nor forgot to lavish love and affection upon them. For the rest of her life, she would use him as the measure for every man she met, always being attracted to older men who showed her father's qualities and, like him, would make her feel like a little girl again. She never completely outgrew her lonely childhood, despite the luxuries of growing up on Park Avenue and summering in East Hampton. By the time she met Jack Kennedy, her insecurity was noticeable to friends who still remember her from those days. Jackie was very sweet, but rather shy, recalls the wife of a senator friend of Kennedy's. She was so in love with Jack, although he barely paid any attention to her, and was always making fun of her because she was so flat-chested she had to wear padded bras. It was quite obvious to us that she wanted to marry more than he did, although he was thinking about it and asking his friends what they thought he should do. He was so darned ambivalent about it that we kidded him and said he should put the matter before the Senate for a vote. When he finally got around to proposing to her, Jackie was ecstatic, and I don't think it was just because she was so crazy about Jack. She would also be getting out from under her domineering mother, who criticized everything she did. I don't think her mother ever forgave Jackie her idolatry of her father. Once, when Jackie and Lee were teenagers, they secretly managed to get him out of a hospital where he was drying out, and Janet was furious because in her eyes, things could never get bad enough for Jack Black Bouvier. Anyway, once Jack proposed, Jackie immediately quit her job and started concentrating on getting married, but the wedding pressure became too much for him, and soon after the engagement was announced, Jack took off for Europe with his Harvard roommate, Torby MacDonald, to charter a yacht and go sailing off the coast of France. We were all afraid he'd never come back. A Newport friend of Jackie's, who was also close to JFK, remembers spending the evening before the engagement announcement appeared in the papers at a party with Kennedy. He went out to dinner with my wife and myself, got very drunk, and later took a woman home and spent that night with her. But before that, we were together for about 3 hours, and he never once mentioned the engagement announcement coming out the next day, which you've got to admit doesn't sound like a man in love and looking forward to getting married. Still, Jackie felt secure with Kennedy, who was 12 years her senior and possessed an immense amount of self-confidence, which at times bordered on arrogance. He was the most eligible bachelor in the country, rich, famous, handsome, and Jackie was ecstatic. "I'm the luckiest girl in the world," she said. She especially relished the fact that her mother was scared to death of him. And as she told one friend, "Mummy is terrified of Jack because she can't push him around at all." For his part, Kennedy maintained a polite relationship with his formidable mother-in-law, and even after years of marriage referred to her only as Mrs. Auchincloss. By the time Jack met Jackie, he was 35 and had just been elected to the Senate, recalls Betty Spaulding, a longtime friend of the Kennedys. And his chariness in marriage was being... Is it chariness or chariness? Chariness? I haven't said that word since Shakespeare. I think it's chariness. I can't remember. Of marriage was being superseded by the political need for a wife. That's why he married her. He was going to be a president, and he certainly couldn't take Angie Dickinson to the White House with him. Jackie fitted the bill. She also broke Jack Kennedy's lifelong pattern of being attracted only to beautiful models, voluptuous starlets, and Copa girls who had no formal college degrees, no intellectual inclinations whatsoever, and no social standing. Fully aware of his previous involvements, Jackie would say in a puzzled, touching way, "But I'm so different from the kind of girls Jack usually finds attractive." From his father, Jack Kennedy had learned how to draw a shrewd line between women for mistresses and women for marriage. Jackie was the wifey type. Jackie was pretty enough, but she certainly didn't have the luscious beauty of some of Jack's other women, like Inga Arvid, Angela Green, and Flo Pritchett, said one of JFK's Navy buddies. But she was very well educated and had impeccable social credentials. And don't forget, she was Catholic too. Jack could never have married outside the church and still become president. Such reminiscences from close friends indicate that Jack Kennedy's political ambitions motivated his marriage proposal to Jackie as much as anything. He was attracted to her, yes, but it was not the romantic involvement of a young man desperately in love that was propelling him down the aisle. There was a definite design in his selection of a wife who was schooled at Miss Chapin's, Miss Porter's, and Vassar, who spoke French fluently, who was Catholic, and who came from a securely established family. It was a more refined decision than a butcher makes, selecting a slab of beef. But it was with the same deliberate quality. I once asked him if he'd ever fallen desperately, hopelessly in love, recalls James Burns, and he just shrugged and said, "I'm not the heavy lover type." Having grown up with a father who would blatantly flaunt his mistresses, bringing them home for dinner with his wife and children, and traveling with them openly on family vacations, Jack Kennedy naturally grew up with a distorted view of marriage. In contrast to his philandering father, his mother played the role of the perfect wife, ferociously religious and seemingly content with raising the children and supervising the corps of maids, cooks, and butlers, much like a general dispatching troops. To Jack's way of thinking, women were there to serve men, says Betty Spaulding, and any wife of his would be there to do for him the same way Mama Rose did for Big Joe, with the right food, good clothes, laundered and cleaned, meals on time, and the house running smoothly so he could attend to business and not worry about the domestic side of life when he came home. This was completely compatible with Jackie's way of thinking, as she viewed her primary role of wife and mother. Even as First Lady, her intention was to create a home, to distract and amuse her husband in the evenings when he was worn by the pressures and problems of his job. This was all she ever really wanted, all she ever knew. Being the product of a broken home, her own vision of marriage was marred by the cold and passionless relationship between her parents, their 6-month separation, their abysmal reconciliation, and finally their bitter divorce, which shattered any emotional security she had ever known. While developing a strong fixation for her father, she watched her mother marry a man of wealth and position, who by high standards was considered a good provider. Growing up in a subculture where women must marry well in order to survive and prosper, Jackie understandably gravitated to John F. Kennedy, who fitted into her scheme of the world as she knew it. As one of her friends from Newport said, "During those days our future was to marry well. That's all we'd ever really been trained to do, and that's what we did, just like our mothers did before us." Jackie deviated only by taking a job after college, a very daring thing to do in those days, but in the end she used that job to meet interesting people and snare Jack, and once that was accomplished, she married like the rest of us. This particular friend, who grew up with Jackie and made her debut at the same time, remembers Jackie lolling about the family cabana at Bailey's Beach in Newport, flying with Steve Spencer in his private plane, playing tennis with Ben Lewis, and swimming with John Sterling. But for all of that, she was never really popular with boys in the way Lee was. Steve and Ben and John were all part of our Newport crowd, and Jackie got along very well with all of them, but she wasn't really pursued. Maybe it was because she was so aloof and not vivacious like her younger sister. In those days, we were all very superficial and didn't really know how to communicate. We all spent our time just having fun and waiting to get married. Jackie waited longer than most of her friends. Even in high school, she wondered if she would ever find a husband. "I just know no one will ever marry me," she told a friend at Miss Porter's school, "and I'll end up as a house mother at Farmington." Later, not many men were interested in her. Aside from her stepbrother Yusha, who was very much in love with her, she had few dates. One man, now living in Washington, remembers being forced to take her out by his mother, who was good friends with Janet Auchincloss. He recalls, "I was in the Navy then and stationed in Newport, and my mother kept pushing me to call her, saying she would be a nice girl for me to date. So I finally asked her out and went to a few parties and dances. We must have gone out 6 or 7 times, but it was dreadful. It was a dreadful experience at the time. She wasn't very pretty. In fact, she was what we used to refer to as a real wallflower. She was so introverted and shy that it was almost painful to be with her. Her parents liked me, though, and encouraged me to take her out. They even proposed me for a private membership in Bailey's Beach, so I felt rather obligated to date her. But Jackie was so insecure and complicated that it was never any fun." Always uncomfortable in Newport, Jackie found it difficult to make friends. The resentment she felt towards her mother was transferred to women in general, so she had few girlfriends as a youngster, and as an adult never established strong relationships with women other than her sister. She preferred pets to people and was happiest horseback riding alone. Zsa Zsa Gabor recalled meeting her on a plane flying back from the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in 1953, when Jackie was a wandering photographer and dating Jack Kennedy. 24 hours on the plane, she kept asking me, it was no joke, "What do you do for your skin?" And I never bothered to ask her name. She wasn't the most glamorous nor the most beautiful woman. She had kinky hair and bad skin. When we arrived at the airport, Jackie said, "There's a young man who's going to propose to me." And I was taken off the plane before her, and Jack stood there. And Jack says, "My darling sweetheart, I was always in love with you." Jack used to take me out quite often, and he was such a sweetheart. He lifted me up in the air. Jackie came off the plane and saw Jack do that to me. After 24 hours of pestering me, asking about this cream and that lotion, she didn't even say hello to me. So Jack Kennedy said to me, "I want you to meet Miss Bouvier." He didn't say my future wife. And I said, "Oh my God, we spoke 24 hours together on the plane. She's a lovely girl." Before Jack Kennedy came along, Jackie tried to enjoy the parties and dances her mother insisted she attend. They were okay, she said later. But Newport, when I was about 19, I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life there. I didn't want to marry any of the young men I grew up with, not because of them, but because of their life. I didn't know what I wanted, but I was still floundering. The vivacious Lee, 3.5 years younger than her sister, tinier, prettier, more feminine and not so floundering, beat Jackie down the aisle by marrying Michael Temple Canfield in April of 1953 when she was 20 years old. Like her sister, Lee attended Chapin School and later Miss Porter's in Farmington. Like Jackie, Lee was the debutante of the year when she made her debut in 1950. But it was Lee who received full-page coverage in Life, plus a movie offer from a Hollywood talent scout. Instead of following Jackie to Vassar, Lee went to Sarah Lawrence for 2 years, where she dabbled in design and took parts in school plays. After taking voice lessons in Italy for a few months, my mother thought I had a beautiful voice. She came home to marry Canfield, the socially prominent son of publisher Cass Canfield. A Harvard graduate and Marine combat veteran of Iwo Jima, Canfield was working for his father's publishing house in New York. He later took a job at the American Embassy in London, where as private secretary to Winthrop Aldrich, the U.S. ambassador to the court of St. James's, he and Lee soon became part of international society. Considered the outsiders in the Auchincloss family, Jackie and Lee clung to each other. But Jackie, always having to take care of her younger sister, resented Lee, especially when she stole the spotlight. In later years, it would be Lee who would flounder around, trying first to establish herself as an actress. Then, having been demolished by the drama critics, giving up the stage to become a writer. After the dismal failure of her first book, One Special Summer, in which she recounts her schoolgirl adventures with Jackie in Europe, she gave up writing too. She then tried television, but failed to excite any interest as a talk show hostess. Then worked as an interior designer. Although Lee would eventually become a princess with a royal title and immense wealth, she always felt beaten in life by Jackie's success as First Lady. The sisters' childhood rivalry for their father's affection made their adult relationship extremely complex and at times explosive. Both gravitated to the same type of man when they grew up. Jackie resented the attention that Kennedy paid to Lee and she hated the fact that when she was out of town or unable to accompany her husband, he would proudly take her younger sister on state trips abroad. It was Lee, not Jackie, who stood at the president's side in Germany when he made his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. Again, it was Lee, not Jackie, who accompanied Kennedy on his sentimental journey to Ireland. That would probably drive me crazy, too. Lee is so dippy about Jack, it's sickening, Jackie once complained to a friend. But the grating resentment came because Kennedy was just as fond of Lee and always looked forward to her visits and the gossipy little stories she would bring him about who was sleeping with whom in London and Paris. I used to store up anecdotes to amuse him, said Lee. He was interested in everything. That kind of life-enhancing vitality was very much part of him. He would remember the littlest unfinished detail and ask about it next time. Although it was customary then for the oldest daughter to marry first, no one was at all surprised when Lee had the first wedding. She was a sexy little thing, while Jackie was more of a tomboy and into horses, says a woman who knew both sisters very well. Virginity, considered a middle-class virtue in the 50s, was something we all wanted to get rid of then, and I'm sure Lee did that first too, she says. Jackie was just not as advanced as her sister in those areas, although she certainly tried hard enough. She used to say she liked before and after sex better than during, and we all laughed about the story, probably more apocryphal than authentic, of her deflowering, which has Jackie and John P. Marcon Jr. doing the deed, and Jackie, blunt as ever, exclaiming afterwards, "Oh, is that all there is to it?" Hardly a bashful virgin, Jackie tried to be discreet about her affair with Jack Kennedy before her marriage. One time, on the night train from Newport to Washington after a weekend at Hammersmith Farm, JFK sat on a berth talking to a friend who was preparing for bed. As the friend tells the story, Jackie walked down the aisle, saw the two chatting, and headed off without so much as a smile or a nod of recognition. Kennedy laughed out loud, grabbed her by the hand, and said, "Jackie, come back here and stop acting so silly. So-and-so knows all about us." I was Jack's age and married, but having my own affairs at the time, and which he knew all about. He obviously felt Jackie was being a little too prissy to try to pretend in front of me that they weren't sleeping together. New York autograph dealer Charles Hamilton recalls an exchange of letters he found between Blackjack Bouvier and his daughter when she was in college. Jackie tried to explain to her father why she had stayed out all night with the young man. It was obvious from her letter that she had been sleeping around, and her excuse for the all-night escapade was specious. However, her father wrote back a beautiful letter saying that a woman could have wealth and beauty and brains, but without a reputation she was lost. It was a tender letter that did not censure her, only tried to tell her to take care of herself. Sexually experienced but emotionally immature, Jack and Jackie were unable at first to relate to each other in terms of husband and wife. Each self-centered, they did not know how to share themselves with each other, and having only communicated on a superficial social level all their lives, neither was prepared to deal with the intimacies of living together. I think that one of the things that was so difficult for Jack when he finally married Jackie, says Betty Spalding, both of them were emotionally blocked. She had the same emotional blocks and panics that he had. And their relationship was extremely stormy in the beginning because their psychosexual emotional development had been retarded. Jack used to tell me how hard constancy was for him and showing emotion. He'd say, "I just can't do it." Neither could Jackie. Nor could Jack really talk to her with the same sense of ease and fluency, however superficial, as he did with other women. In their strangulated way, they loved each other, but neither was able to relate to the other, and there was never any affection between them at any time. He was always quite diffident towards her. The extremely self-conscious young woman who married John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1953 was light years away from the woman she would eventually become. At that time, she was vulnerable, tentative, and shy, always worrying about her appearance, fretting over her clothes and what she should wear to make the right impression. Once, when she accompanied Jack to Hyannis Port for a weekend before they were married, she showed up for dinner terribly overdressed, and he teased her, saying, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Jackie was humiliated by the incident, especially when her his sisters, elbowing each other in the ribs, laughed at her. Poor thing. I first met Jackie at one of their engagement parties on the Cape when I was married to Chuck, and I liked her very much, says Mrs. Spalding. She was not at all the kind of girl Jack had been seeing before. She had a certain amount of polish. We got on very well together, and she told me that I was the only one of Jack's friends she could really talk to, confiding in me how terrified she was of marrying into that Irish stronghold of Kennedy's. The thing that worried her most was handling the family. And God, they were an overbearing bunch, always charging around, bursting into the room, constantly interrupting you, dropping in unannounced, having their own private jokes, ganging up to make fun of someone, and then holding the poor fool up to noisy ridicule in front of everyone else. The Kennedys were like the family in Tolstoy's War and Peace, but with none of the polish and intellect. Yikes. All their energies were thrown into sports and politics. It was a culture shock for Jackie, who was absolutely stupefied about how to cope with such an Irish picnic. Let's see how much longer the chapter is. Man, she writes long chapters. Holy smokes. Competition, that's what makes them go. That's what makes them go, said Joe Kennedy, describing his family. They're all competitive, including the girls. In fact, Eunice has more drive than Jack or even Bobby. If she had balls, she'd probably be president herself. This raucous family of overachievers, each trying to pummel the other athletically, was anathema, I've never seen that word, to a woman who hated competing at team sports. In the beginning, Jackie tried valiantly to play the Kennedys' roughhouse games, but after Teddy broke her ankle by falling on top of her in a game of touch football, she retired to the sidelines. "Just watching them tires me out," she once said publicly. Privately, she was telling Lee what gorillas they all were, romping and stomping each other like a bunch of baboons suddenly let loose. After one family siege at Hyannis Port, Jackie returned to Washington black and blue with bruises and told her sister, "They'll kill me before I ever get to marry him. I swear they will." Jackie admits to more than a little apprehension about her first meeting with the entire family, including Rose, whom she always refused to defer to, considering her autocratic and self-centered, and mimicking her as the grande dame mother. I'd met Jack in Washington when he was in Congress, and he used to come to Bobby and Ethel's house, so I knew him with Bobby and Ethel well. And I knew Eunice, but I'd never seen the whole group together. Obviously, if you really liked the elder brother and were rather shy, you might have been a little nervous. And she was more than justified in being a little nervous, because behind her back the Kennedy sisters were beginning to question their brother's taste in women. While Jack and Lee giggled to themselves about the Kennedy women, Jackie and Lee, calling them the rah-rah girls, the sisters disparaged Jackie, calling her the debutante, and making fun of what they called her babykins voice, which was whispery and soft. They even mimicked her for pronouncing her name Jacqueline. She says it rhymes with queen, Ethel told her sisters-in-law. When Jackie told Ethel her secret ambition had once been to be a ballet dancer, Ethel yelped with laughter. "With those clodhoppers of yours," she screamed, pointing to Jackie's size 10 feet. "You'd be better off going in for soccer, kid." Ethel would very soon find her brash humor no match for Jackie's rapier wit. Confiding in her sister, Jackie described Ethel as the type who would put a slipcover on a Louis Quinze sofa and then spell it Louis Kahn. I don't know. Is it Quinn? I don't know. I'm just a pleb. Okay. Jackie's devotion to fox hunting, French, and fine antiques automatically put her at odds with the Kennedy women, who, like Jack, Bobby, and Teddy, cared only for the rough and tumble of politics and winning. "They even compete with each other in conversation," said Jackie, "to see who can say the most and talk the loudest." For a woman who treasured privacy and needed solitude, the tightly knit, boisterous Kennedys were wearisome en masse. Before long, Jackie firmly refused to attend the nightly family dinners at Hyannisport, where they would all gather to argue politics. "Once a week is great," she said, "but not every night." Though she found their ravenous appetite for power perplexing, it was the continual political discussions of the clan that completely baffled her. She had been raised in a family so Republican that all through her childhood she confused Franklin Delano Roosevelt with the devil. As long as she could remember, her father had blamed his Wall Street misfortunes on the Securities and Exchange Commission, which Roosevelt established in 1934 to regulate the nation's stock market. When Joseph P. Kennedy took over the SEC, he forced stockbrokers like Jack Bouvier to curtail their buying and selling, allowing them to purchase stocks only on the downswing. As a result, Black Jack suffered a $43,000 trading loss in 1 year and developed a teeth-grinding hatred of FDR's New Deal, the SEC, and in particular Joe Kennedy. So strong were his feelings that, according to John Davis, Jack's tan would momentarily fade at the mere mention of Kennedy's name. Yet it was the old man, a paterfamilias in the grand tradition, running his family like a tribal chieftain, who alone could truly appreciate Jackie's worth. Accustomed to his aggressive daughters and the equally bombastic Ethel, he was confused at first by Jackie's quiet ways, but she slowly won him over by standing up to him and displaying the kind of character the elder Kennedy could respect. Once, during a rare lull in a family conversation, Jack turned to Jackie and said, "A penny for your thoughts?" Jackie smiled sweetly and said softly but loud enough for everyone else to hear, "But they're my thoughts, Jack. And they would not be my thoughts anymore if I told you, now would they?" A lull in the conversation became a deafening silence as the rest of the family looked at each other, wondering about this peculiar creature who insisted on being so private and evasive. Finally, old Joe started laughing uproariously. "By God, Jack, she's got zipperoo," he said. "Jackie's a girl with a mind of her own, a girl just like us." "You betcha she is," said Jack, grateful to his father for salvaging the awkward situation. In such little ways did Joe Kennedy pave the way for Jackie, giving her his imprimatur, which did not necessarily require the rest of the family to embrace her, but merely to accept her as he did, despite her differences. Jackie identified with her father-in-law, saying that she was more like him than anyone else in the family, including his own children. She enjoyed teasing him or giving me the needle, as Joe Kennedy described it, and once painted a watercolor for him, showing a crowd of young Kennedys on the beach looking at the sun. The caption read, "You can't take it with you, Dad's got it all." This proud, domineering man, who was determined to put his son in the White House, naturally took an active interest in the women Jack was dating. During the days he was involved with Inga Arvad, Joe Kennedy did all he could to break up the relationship. Inga was a Scandinavian beauty who had once known Adolf Hitler in Berlin. She even accompanied Der Führer to the 1936 Olympics. When she came to the United States and began working for the Washington Times-Herald, she was immediately placed under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation on suspicion of espionage. Word about the FBI files being kept on Inga leaked to Joe through his political network, and he furiously tried to persuade his son to stop seeing her, knowing that such a dicey relationship would ruin Jack's political career. Inga Binga, as Jack fondly called his lover, was not only suspected of being a Nazi spy, but she was also a married woman at the time. While Joe Kennedy could afford to buy an annulment, he refused to do so, knowing that this could never compensate for the ugly scandal which would inevitably result. Years later, the private files of J. Edgar Hoover would indicate yet another woman John Kennedy was involved with, who was allegedly paid $500,000 to drop a lawsuit claiming that Kennedy jilted her in 1951. The late FBI director's files contain a 1963 memo sent to Attorney General Robert Kennedy, noting an article in the Italian weekly magazine L'Or, which stated that a woman identified as Alicia Purdom, then the wife of actor Edmund Purdom, said she had been engaged to marry John F. Kennedy. The magazine said the engagement was broken off in 1951 after strenuous objection from Joseph P. Kennedy concerning the woman's Polish and Jewish ancestry. The FBI memo to the Attorney General reads, in part, in addition to the bill of particulars, letters were exhibited which mention John F. Kennedy as an associate of this woman. When this suit was filed in New York just prior to the president's assuming office, you, Robert Kennedy, went to New York and arranged for a settlement of the case out of court for $500,000. All papers relating to this matter, including the complaint, allegedly were immediately sealed by the court. Unquestionably, Joe Kennedy had the power to squash the matter and quietly arrange a payoff in a way that could never be traced back to him or politically damage his son. One man close to the Kennedys says, Old Joe was too smart to cave in to blackmail, but when faced with a lawsuit that might explode and ruin Jack's presidency, he would definitely pony up with whatever it took him to keep the matter quiet. And $500,000 to him was nothing but a good investment to protect his son. I'm sure the FBI files are accurate, but what the hell difference does it make now? Joe put Jack into the White House, and that's all that ever mattered to him. During 1962, there were unsubstantiated reports circulating that President Kennedy had been married and divorced before his marriage to Jackie in 1953. The reports stemmed from an obscure genealogy published in 1957 as the Blauvelt Family Genealogy by Louis L. Blauvelt, who died at 82, a year before publication of the book. The questionable entry in the book reads, Dury Carr, Malcolm. We have no birth date. She was born Carr, but took the name of her stepfather. She first married Furman Delage IV. They were divorced. Dury then married F. John Bursbach. They were divorced, and she married John F. Kennedy, son of Joseph P. Kennedy, one-time ambassador to England. There are no children of the second or third marriages. I bet it's true then. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't surprise me if he was married as a younger man. Because that's just like a very offhand sort of thing to put in. And it's not like it's, you know. Reporters trying to check out the story never found any records of any marriage license being issued, any marriage certificates or divorce proceedings pertaining to the reported marriage of John Kennedy to Dury Malcolm. The only document found in the files of the compiler of the genealogy was an old clipping from a Miami gossip column reporting that Miss Malcolm Dury and Mr. Kennedy had been seen together in a restaurant soon after World War II. Miss Malcolm later in 1947 married Thomas Shevlin of Palm Beach and Newport 10 years before publication of the genealogy. Shevlin was once married to Lorraine Cooper, wife of the then senator from Kentucky, John Sherman Cooper, a close Kennedy friend. Records show that this woman was unmarried and thus technically in a position to marry Kennedy only twice in her life, once between the summer of 1938 and January 1939 when he was a junior at Harvard, and once between January and July of 1947, during his first 6 months in Congress as a member of the House of Representatives. Kennedy refused to issue a public denial, which would have given added circulation to the story. When his close friend, Bren Bradley, then working for the Newsweek magazine, asked him about the marriage, Kennedy was quite amused and replied, "You have met her. You remember one day we played golf at Seminole, and we went into the pro shop, and there was a girl on the sofa and a guy standing next to her. Well, that was Dury Malcolm, and that was Shevlin. She was a girlfriend of my brother, Joe, and I took her out a couple times, I guess, that's all." Bradley says Kennedy then said, "You haven't got it, Benji. You're all looking to tag me with some girl, and none of you can do it because it just isn't there." Being his father's son, Jack Kennedy was naturally a womanizer. "He comes by it honestly," Joe Kennedy once joked. The father's concerns were that Jack not do anything to damage his political career. He relished his son's escapades with beautiful women at the Everglades Club in Palm Beach and teased him about the broads he took to El Morocco in New York. On one occasion, Joe even tried to seduce the same women himself. But when it came to marriage, he was adamant that his son make a calculated choice in picking a wife, one that, as he said, is not related to the groin. In Jackie, Joe saw the perfect wife for his son. She was a woman who had class, one of his favorite words, and she had enough of it to automatically elevate the family socially. Most importantly, she was Catholic, which was the number one requirement if he was going to put his son in the White House. Marriage to a Protestant or a divorcee would be out of the question if Jack Kennedy was to break the barriers of bigotry, which had existed since Al Smith tried and failed for the presidency in 1928. Being a French Catholic made Jackie, in Joe's mind, an aristocrat in comparison with Boston Irish Catholics. Throughout the years of their marriage, Jack's father would be the one person Jackie always would turn to for protection and support. So close was their relationship that Jackie once said, next to my husband and my own father, I love Joe Kennedy more than anyone else in the world. Strong as he was, Joe was not able to shield her from all the internal strains clawing at him. Strains which would soon become so intensified within her political marriage that, growing more depressed and despairing, she would eventually decide to submit herself to a private psychiatric clinic for electroshock therapy. And that is the end of chapter 2. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start uploading this video, and as it's uploading, I will start to record the little princesses, because it's been like 2 weeks since we read a chapter, so we need to get a chapter out. All right, I will see you very soon. Thank you so much for being with me. Bye.